everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a show dedicated to the amazing male, female and other survivors across the world. We know there are many of us, and this is designed for you to have a safe place to land. My name's Gloria Masters and I'll be hosting the show. As with all shows I bring to you, it's really important that we have a trigger warning, and the reason for that is that if you become triggered or upset watching this, it doesn't serve you in any way. It's actually better to stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be directed to some resource and support. You're welcome. I'd love to introduce you now to the guest on our show today. He comes to us from the state of Victoria in Australia. I always get excited when I interview people from Australia because it's close to me here in New Zealand. He's an amazing person. He's a general manager of Child Safe Australia. He's a survivor. He's an advocate. But wait, there's more. Of course there is. He's also the founder of the Table Talk project, which he runs. So welcome to the show, Neil Milton.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel really privileged to be here.
Well, it's awesome that you are. And, you know, there's so much around this, Neil, and I know you see it in your beautiful country as well. And it's brave people like you that step forward and share the truth of your experience that helps give permission to our amazing survivors out there who maybe haven't found that courage. So backtoyou.com would be really interested in hearing your story of child sexual abuse, just as much or as little as you're comfortable to share.
Yeah, no worries. Look, so when I was 10 years old, I was befriended by another child who was about 18 months older than me, and he befriended me, and because I didn't really have any friends, I started being friends with this guy. We spent heaps of time together outside of school, very much secret kind of business, if you like, and we were playing armies, you know, the shoot 'em up games and things like that, out in the park and those sorts of things, and I thought it was pretty cool. Like, I just thought it was great, you know. I've got a friend now and things like that. The problem is that he wasn't really friends with me at school, and you know, something didn't twig right. But I just thought, oh well, I've never had a friend before. Maybe this is what it is, and so we started being friends and we started developing this great friendship. And but later on into the friendship, for some reason, every time he died in the game, in the army game, he'd fall on top of me, and I couldn't get him off. It was like he was dead, you know, that kind of thing. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. But I thought, well, maybe this is what friendship is. That's okay, you know, that kind of thing. But then I don't know how. I actually don't know how it went from that to a sexual relationship where every single recess and lunchtimes we were naked in the boys' toilets doing stuff. And I actually have no idea how it went to that. I know that I didn't. That's not something that I set out to do or anything like that. It was just something that happened. I now know it was grooming. And I went to my my mom and I said, this is what's happening. Is this normal behavior? And to which she replied, you're just experimenting. And unfortunately that went on till I was 13 years old. And so all through the rest of primary school and the first year of high school, and I actually wanted it, to be honest with you. You know, like I thought that's what friendship was. I thought it wanted it. And then when it stopped abruptly, I was like, but hang on a second. Like, I thought that this was this. Now, I never thought that I was gay. that I was same-sex attracted or anything like that. I just thought this is what friendship was. And I remember sitting there when I was 13 years old, after all this had happened. It was just at that time when Magic Johnson had come out and shared that he had AIDS. And so I looked up AIDS in the encyclopedia, those books that aren't Google anymore, but it's actually big books. And I was sitting on the toilet in my house, and I was reading this encyclopedia, and I looked at all the symptoms, and I thought to myself, I have every single one of those symptoms. At 13 years old, I have AIDS. And of course, I was wrong, but this is what was going on in my head, because this is all the symptoms that were happening, and I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And I actually have no idea how I navigated that, but somehow I put it out of my head and kept living my life. And I felt like at the time, I thought that all of this was just normal behavior, because I was told that I was just experimenting.
So, Neil, well, there's so many places you and I can go with that, but thank you for sharing this. I think the fact is that we know that child on child abuse is very common. We know that it's often discounted, and even to the point where parents like your mum decided that it was experimenting. And I guess I just want to bring you back and ask you a couple of things that may help our beautiful audience. Hello, lovely ones out there. I see you. And that is this. How are you feeling on the inside? Because as abuse is happening, we always have an internal reaction.
Yeah, well, I honestly didn't think it was abuse. So it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I was in a church car park. I was a leader at a youth group. And this person that was also someone who we were raising up as a leader was wrestling with his own homosexuality, his own sexual thoughts and things like that. And in order to connect with him, I shared my story of what I had experienced as a child. And he, at the end of it, he was just like, Neil, you realize that's abuse, right? I'm like, no, I was told that it wasn't abuse, or they didn't mention that word, but I was told it was just experimenting. So I never thought that. From there,
Yeah.
when I realized that it was abuse, and then I didn't know what to do with my feelings.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. I guess, sorry, I'm not being clear enough. What I'm trying to say is not what the label of it was, but how you felt on the inside. Because,
Oh, yeah, sure.
yeah, so, when we're being abused as children, something feels off, something feels wrong. And I'm just wondering if that was your experience.
Yeah, I was wondering why he would have to fall on top of me, why he wanted to take my clothes off, why, those sort of things. Like, it's not like I had ever felt like I other people in my life that, my footy mates and things like that, like when we hang out, I wasn't ripping their clothes off, and I wasn't falling on them, and I wasn't doing all that sort of stuff. So it just didn't seem right. And even to the point where we were playing once in my shed, and the roller door was half down. And I remember my mum even pulling up the roller door and seeing it. And he just said, and she just said, "Oh, I think you better go home now," to this boy. That's it. But no conversation, no, you're never seeing this person again, no protection there. It was just, I knew there was something not right when that happened, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I
Yeah,
felt betrayed. I felt betrayed by my mum.
yeah,
Now as an adult, I felt lonely. I felt lost,
yeah,
and I felt confused. And all these big emotions were going on in my body. and I actually had nowhere to place them.
No. And I think you've raised a really valuable point, actually. All of those feelings you were having, the betrayal, the confusion, the loss, what are you meant to do with this? Of course, if you can't make sense of it and you don't have an adult, for whatever reason, able to help you through it, you will either externalize it in some way, or you will internalize it and become more isolated, withdrawn, or depressed. So, what was it for you, Neil? What did you find in your response? Were you more outwardly showing this?
I think in reflection, I went into drugs and drinking at a young age, probably 15, 16 years old. And again, that was about acceptance. So because I really struggled with friendships, I was bullied as a kid. The only experience of a friend that I had was one that took advantage of me. And so I just wanted to be loved. Like I just wanted to be accepted and cared for. And the group that I was hanging out with at the time was into drugs. Now they loved me, they cared about me. They'd rock up to my house. I never had that before, and it felt so good. And I knew one night, I knew at one point they would invite me to take the pipe and start to do drugs. And I had a choice at that point. And that night I did, and I chose it, and I did do drugs from 16 to 21, and and uh, and drinking, and obviously really bad relationships as well. Like, again, I was just looking for that opportunity to be loved and cared for. And I'm sad to say that I think I treated some women incredibly bad in that time.
And look, I can understand that. So, look, the thing is, I suppose, and just again, just to clarify, and then we'll move on to those kind of the way that we express and deal with the abuse once we're cognizant of it, is this. When you were a kid between 10 and 13, you were carrying this huge weight, if you think about it, which couldn't be talked about. How did you show that between those ages? Were you a kid that just withdrew more? Were you a kid that just went out and beat up other kids in the neighborhood? What did you do with the weight of all of this? Were you carrying it on the inside or the outside? How were you showing the world?
I was a bit of a sportaholic. So
Oh,
I went into sport because I was picked for stuff with sport because I was good at sport. Footy, basketball, tennis, whatever you gave me, I would use and be good at.
yeah,
And so I'd immerse myself into that. And so, because that was an escape as well, I didn't have to think about anything except that sport. Um,
yes,
and I was able to, be me, if you like. And then the other thing I think as well is that I didn't know this, but every chance I got, I'd want to be out of the house. Like I just wanted to be somewhere else. I'd be down the park, or I'd be here, or whatever it is, and I'd hardly be at home. And and I think probably deep down, I was probably wanting to escape whatever was going on in my head. But at 10 to 13 years old, how do you deal with the thought you've got AIDS? You've had this situation where you've been groomed effectively, not that you know that at the time, and used and abused, but you don't know that at the time. But you just feel all these emotions, and I was a runner as well, so I tried to run and sprint and all that sort of stuff as well. So I think probably in reflection, I did a lot of those things. But
I
I have to say as well that between 13 and probably 15 years old, I don't have a lot of memory.
no.
Um, I just don't. I just don't know how I coped. I actually don't know. I
Yeah.
can't.
And look, I completely understand, because, of course, throughout all of that, Neil, is what we call dissociation. And we know that's what happens when we leave our bodies, because staying in them is too hard. So there would have been periods of time, you said earlier in the interview, you're not quite sure how it went from him falling on top of you to being naked every recess and lunchtime. Well, that kid knew what he was doing. He knew how to, he targeted, he
Yep.
groomed, and then he acted.
Yeah.
So for you to feel unable or confused, or some of the words you've used, confused, betrayed, lost, alone, and all of it, completely understandable. And for our beautiful survivors watching, there will be people in the audience who struggle with that as well. And it's often that confusing word that comes through, because we don't know. We don't know what's happening to us. And if you don't know, you can't really make sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Neil, you talk about drugs and alcohol and kind of addictive behavior and bad relationships. And I think, we can, as adults looking back, see all that clearly. But at the time, what we're doing is, I'd love to know what you think. I wonder if we're just trying to escape the feelings that emerge because of the abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think I never drank for fun. Like, as in, what I mean by that, I never drank. Like, at 15, 16 years old, I wasn't drinking to just have a sip and then sit down and have a chat with the boys.
Yeah.
I always drink to get drunk. Like, it was just, you'd buy the cheapest alcohol in order to end your night quickly in some ways. And the drugs side of things, like, that was just any chance I got, all through year 12. I just was stoned, and every weekend and things like that. And even though your body's kind of, being destroyed one weekend at a time, you just keep going because you want that acceptance and you're trying to escape those kind of images.
I get that. And, I'm so grateful, and this may surprise you, but that our minds do that for us, Neil, because what they're doing is protecting us. Until we're ready to deal with this, we're going to be kept away from it. Isn't that beautiful? So
Mm.
it doesn't matter to me what survivors do, me included, whether it was drugs, alcohol, food, work, gambling, whatever your addiction, it might be sex, whatever your addiction was, I understand it,
Mm.
because we're all just doing what we can to survive this. And as you said, that became what you did up until about 21. So was there anyone in your life that you did feel during that time that you could kind of share with or approach, as you were getting older, kind of 20, 21 years of age? Was there anyone there that you were able to share with? No.
No, I mean, only that person, because I thought it was more around a connection point with this person, to say, hey, you're not alone. We've, some of us have had these feelings or have had experiences before. That's the only reason I brought it up. I hadn't brought it up ever since 13 years old, like, as in, I'd never brought up that story. I'd never told anyone. I'd never, nothing. Because, like I said, I felt like, my mum just said, you're just experimenting. So, when someone you trust says something that you believe, it's like the thoughts disappeared. It's like, okay, cool, no worries, just experimenting, no worries. But when something doesn't make sense, and when this person said that, I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, what? Nah, that doesn't make sense. And then as I sat and thought about it, I was like, okay. And then after that moment, my early 20s, after that moment, I did have an experience in a church once. And I don't know why. I don't know why this happened, but I was at a church, and I was and the speaker was speaking, and I just was really angry. Like, I just wanted to punch him in the head. And so I came up to him after, and I said to him, I said, I don't know what's going on here, but I feel like I need to punch you in the head. Like, imagine him feeling that. And as he did, he said, oh, let's just pray or whatever it is. So I did. And I had this real image of the person that that had abused me, and I was putting my hand on his head, like, you know, like pushing him down kind of thing. And I said this to this speaker, and he said, no, that's actually a sign of blessing. And I was like, that doesn't make sense to me, but okay. And this, whatever happened, whatever you believe, but I had what I would call a pretty incredible experience where I felt like something lifted, and I was able to forgive this person, and I still to this day 100% forgive them. Now, that doesn't mean that I forget what happened. That's not how it works. But forgiveness is more for me than him. And so from there, I didn't really talk about it until probably another, maybe until I was about 35.
So, Neil, how old were you when that incident happened with that speaker?
I'm going to go with about 28. I'm
Yeah.
going to go with about 28. But I will say this, I do have an incredible wife who I talk to. And so, you know how you asked that question. We were married at 23 years old. So it was we were quite young, but I did share a bit of my story with her. And she was incredibly loving and supportive. And it wasn't until later on in my late 30s where it really impacted me, which we'll talk about later.
Okay. So, Neil, I guess, thank you. You're very articulate, and I hear, isn't it interesting how throughout your 20s these triggers would appear? And I guess interesting that, you know, when it's your time, it will reveal itself to you. So,
Mm.
I firmly believe that when we're ready, our minds open the door. And often survivors, and I'd like to know what you think of this, often survivors will say to me, I know something happened, but it's just not coming to me and I don't know how to make it. And I always say, when your mind is ready, it,
Mm.
because it's just, to me, the intuitive wisdom or the inner knowing has such wisdom.
Mm.
And if you're not ready to deal, you can't face into it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if you force it, then you're probably not ready to heal, like you're not ready to recover. And the reason being is because um, the motivation to know is actually what's the most important. So, you know, someone asked me once, they said, does it matter? Like, does it matter to you how it went from here to there? Like, how will that knowledge help you to be who you are today? And that's exactly right. You know, like I'm okay with not knowing. In fact, I'm probably better off not knowing in some ways for me. However, um, I feel, and I've said this to someone before, I said, if I did know, maybe that could be utilized to help other people in organizations, because my abuse happened in a school. So, you know, maybe in a school situation, that knowledge of how I was groomed, that's those steps that they took and those are things. Now, I've done a whole bunch of research and I teach this for a living, but I think from my personal experience, I know parts of the grooming process now, but there's a big missing part for me from where it went from to clothes on to clothes off. And so I've thought about doing the EMDR stuff, and I've thought about that in terms of, you know, being taken back there and those sort of things. But right now, I just kind of feel like I'm better not knowing right now.
And I think you need to trust that instinct. So we're just going to finish part one with this. You talked about, being, at 10 to 13 and at some point later during that period of time, you actually wanted it. And I just want to say to you and to all survivors, our bodies are designed for pleasure. And I'll ask Neil this. Neil, if you're cold, do you shiver?
Yeah.
If you're hot, do you sweat?
Yep.
If you're in shock, do you find that your heart races or you start to shake? If you
Oh,
feel, all right. So if your genitals are being stimulated, it is 100% likely that you will respond.
mm, of
So
course.
I think we need to be really clear with our beautiful survivor family that we're designed for this. Our bodies will respond just the way they do when we're cold. So we're going to close out there. Please stay there, Neil. Hey, fabulous ones. Aren't we lucky to have Neil with us today? And I think there's so many threads here, guys. And, I just think one of the things he said already that's got me thinking is he was able to really externalize what he was feeling through being able to play sport, because what happens is it takes you out of yourself. So I really love that. And, the feelings of being betrayed and feeling lonely and feeling lost, we can all relate. And the primo one, of course, is the confusion. So, as always, just as we close out, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.